Um, 1 second. Okay, sorry for my slow start. Always takes me a minute to organize the tech, but I will get started. So I'm going to go through the whole thing like usual, and then we can do questions at the end. This class is about how your dog thinks, learns, and communicates. This is a ginormous topic, so I've really just taken out some things that I think will be useful to you in terms of training your dog at home. So you could spend, a whole 8-hour class on literally each of these topics and then some. So there's a lot more that you can delve into. When I send the recording out, I'm going to include some resources about other things if you want to pursue them more. So think of this as sort of a high level thinking, learning, communicating type thing. And then I'm going to talk towards the end about how that fits into you training your dog at home. So to start, just a reminder of who I am. If anyone is new watching this, my name is Ruth Hegarty, and I am the founder of Preacher Good Dog Training. And we are a positive dog training company specializing in reactive and other fear-based behaviors in dogs. And later this year, like this summer, marks our 5th year in business. So we'll do some fun stuff then. And I use all force-free methods, and I'll reference those while we're going through the program as well. Okay. So today I'm going to cover some aspects of how your dog thinks, how your dog learns, because obviously that's important to training your dog, how your dog communicates, and then how you can teach your dog, how using this information you can teach your dog, and then we'll do Q&A and some next steps at the end. Okay, so starting out with how your dog thinks, or cognition, which you could talk about forever, but one of the things that I want to really highlight in this presentation is how smart dogs are. And dogs are smart enough to make inferences, meaning that they can draw conclusions based on 2 different pieces of information. They can understand human gestures like pointing, which wild animals like wolves cannot do. Even wolves who have been raised in captivity, raised as a pet by humans, still do not understand what a point by a human means. So that's something that's unique to dogs in that way. They can read our intentions. That is in part because they can read our body language so well. There was one study that actually found that dogs can read human facial expressions even better than other humans. That's how sensitive they are. And they're also sensitive to the things that we pay attention to. They notice what we pay attention to, and they notice our emotional state. Some of noticing our emotional state is by reading our body language and understanding that aspect of how we as humans communicate. And some of it is that they can smell the chemical changes in our body when we're feeling different kinds of emotions. So your average dog can learn anywhere between 160 and 250 words. And that, I say average dog, it depends on the individual dog and the breed of the dog, right? Just like humans, some people are smarter than others, and the same is true for dogs. There was one dog, and there's a book about him. The dog's name was Chaser, and he was able to learn 3,000 words. Most of them were names of things. That's something dogs are really good at. So he was able to learn 3,000, he had toys, and he learned 3,000 names of different toys. And that's unusual. So he's sort of a genius dog. Dogs can also imitate human physical language. And an example of this is if you sort of sit on the couch and cross your feet a lot, you might notice that your dog will start to cross their paws. I know I've seen videos of this on the internet. They can learn. There's one, I think I've seen a cat video of this too, but I've seen a dog one where they can like do the fist bump. They'll just imitate the things that we do. And do those things on nods sometimes. So physical language that they can imitate. And some research, and I think all dog parents will agree, that they're able to empathize with our emotions, and those are the dogs that if you're crying or you're feeling sad and not even crying, your dog will kind of come over and put their head on your leg or something. So I think most people who live with dogs would think that the dog is very good at empathizing with our human emotions. Traditional training does not take any of this into account. Traditional training, old school training, whatever you want to call it, focuses on just pure obedience. The dog should do what I say. It's kind of a militaristic attitude. I'm the boss. You should do what I say because I say it. And oftentimes that type of training uses punishment rather than rewards, whereas positive training that tries to include all the knowledge we've had of dogs in the past 20 years uses rewards because that's what works. I mean, that works better for people too. Traditional training does work. It's just that you sacrifice the relationship that you can have with your dog for strict obedience. And positive training strengthens the relationship that you have with your dog. Some of the ways that we know this is a professor, and his name escapes me, but someone from Tufts taught his dog to take an MRI, right? MRI is a big, scary machine. People don't like to do it, but he was able to teach his dog to do it by building a cardboard replica of one at his house and teaching his dog and rewarding his dog for incrementally being able to get in it and lay in it. And then he transitioned that to a real machine. And so we're able to watch dogs' brains in living dogs, which we were never able to do before. So that's where a lot of this information comes from as far as the science of dog brains. So dogs were the very first and probably the most effectively domesticated species. Some people say they domesticated themselves because they saw that people had warmth and food and they just were like, let's get in on that. A recent study came out and said that it was the women of the ancient peoples who domesticated the dogs because they were the first to offer the dogs food and they were the first to give the dogs names and sort of incorporate them into the family, which a little bit makes sense. The women were more often going to be at home tending the fire, making the food, while the men were hunting. So, and they were already taking care of children. So it kind of makes sense that it would be them. But the fact that they were the first and that we've been evolving next to each other, with each other for so many thousands and thousands of years has really created a unique relationship between humans and dogs. And one of the things that has happened is that we both, humans and dogs, both have what's called a caudate nucleus. And that's the pleasure center of the brain. And we both have it. And in these MRI tests that were done, when the dog is able to predict a reward, their brain lights up, this caudate nucleus, the pleasure center of the brain. They're happy that they understand that they're going to be getting a reward. And that's why we use rewards in positive training, because it makes the dog happy. It makes the dog want to work. It makes the dog want to do the thing we're asking them to do because they're happy to get their reward. I mean, I'd rather do something for a reward than do something because I'm afraid of a punishment also. The other thing that lights up the dog's brain and makes the dog super happy is when someone that they care about returns after an absence. So if you imagine how your dog acts when you come home from work or even just from the grocery store and they act like they haven't seen you in months and they're so excited. That's one of the things we love about dogs, right? Nobody ever feels more important than when their dog is so happy to see them after they've been parted, whether you've done something important or not. And so another piece of it from the other direction, when humans hold our dogs and cuddle our dog and we look them in the eye, our brains release the same feel-good chemicals as our brains release when we hold our own human children and look at their faces. So, we have changed as much as the dogs have changed in order to be together. Domestication has also enabled dogs to cope with novelty, novelty being anything that they've never seen before. Adapt to different environments, adapt to different situations, different types of relationships. Dogs are one of the few species that's able to live with people, cats, and parrots all together. That's unusual in the animal world, doesn't normally happen. Occasionally it happens, but it's not a normal thing to have happen. But dogs are able to do that, and that's sort of came along with domestication. Dogs who have not been properly socialized struggle with these relationships. They struggle with the modern world in general, and they're much less adaptable because they haven't learned to be confident. One of the key things about reactive dogs is, one, a lot of them become reactive from a lack of socialization, but an unsocialized dog will respond to novelty with fear, whereas a well-adjusted dog, a confident dog, will approach novelty, whether it's novel situations or novel items, with curiosity, which is a much better way to sort of maneuver through the world. So there's, sort of the downside of living with humans is that it's a very complicated world, and if you're not given the best start in life, just like with people, I suppose, if we're not given the best start in life, it's much harder to be successful. So as a society, that's something that we want to think about, being more careful about, how we raise dogs, who we let raise dogs in terms of breeding and things like that, so that everybody or all of the dogs can have a fair chance at a successful life. So each dog, I'm talking about sort of dogs as a species, but obviously there's going to be individual differences based on genetics, based on life experience, based on, breed mix and things like that. Although I suppose that's the same as genetics. Your dog's sort of makeup and their ability to cope and their level of intelligence is a combination of their genetics and their life experience, the different opportunities or lack of opportunities they have. Genetics is interesting because if your dog's a purebred, you have an idea of your expectations of their behavior because they're bred to behave a particular way. If you have a mix of genetics, then you're not really sure what you're going to get, except that you can say, well, this breed X, because you can DNA test your dog, this breed acts like this, and you can try and figure it out to the best of your ability based on observing your dog's behavior. So it's very helpful I always recommend people DNA test their dog. I think it's fun, but two, it gives you really useful information in terms of how your dog naturally would respond to situations and maybe ways you can adapt how you train them. So one of the things you often hear people say about dogs is that they are about as smart as a toddler, right? To a 3-year-old human person. And that's true. Emotionally in particular, they have sort of the emotional life of a toddler. They are quick to be happy, quick to be sad, quick to be frightened. They want what they want when they want it. They're very in the moment. And that's one of the things that we love about dogs. Where a dog differs is that they have a survivability level of intelligence, a cunningness that human toddlers do not have. A dog is much more likely to be able to survive on the streets, so to speak, than a toddler, because they're able to tap into their instincts to feed themselves, to maybe dig a little den, something like that. So in some ways they're a lot smarter, but when we think in terms of their emotional life, they're very similar. And how we teach them in a lot of ways is very similar, and how we respond to them as well. So some of the different ways that dogs are intelligent, or the types of intelligence that dogs display, are spatial intelligence, and that is mental mapping, organizing your thoughts, organizing your world, understanding how things work in terms of society or your lifestyle. Dogs actually very much like things to be organized. They like routine. They like to be able to anticipate how their day is going to unfold. They also have kinesthetic intelligence, and kinesthetic intelligence is your sort of physical self-awareness, right? Your understanding of how your limbs move, how your body works, agility level. Some dogs have it more than others. You'll meet some dogs sometimes that have a limited back end awareness, like they're always banging their butt into stuff because they forget that they're longer than they think they are. But in general, they're pretty self-aware of their bodies. Interpersonal intelligence is, again, self-knowledge, being aware of what you're capable of, right? So an example of that would be, can I jump this fence, right? So a dog's interpersonal intelligence tells him, yeah, I'm capable of jumping this fence. I'm going to jump this fence. So that's something that is pretty important to have, so that you're not accidentally walking on cliffs, off cliffs and things like that. Some of that is experiential, right? My dog Shadow now, she could absolutely jump my fence. She's not aware that she can yet. I dread the day she figures it out, but she doesn't realize she can do it yet. And that's in part because she is a timid, fearful dog. And so she doesn't really try things that if she were confident, she might try. So dogs also have interpersonal, that's social skills. Some dogs have better ones than others, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But dogs, in terms of social skills, are a lot like us, right? You have people that are more socially awkward and people that are more socially adept, and the same is true for dogs. And some of that is learned behavior, some of it is natural, just like people. Dogs with good social skills have an easier time, going to daycare or going to a park where there's going to be other dogs. They have linguistic intelligence, and that's response to physical or vocal cues. So human speaking, human pointing, that's one of the ways they interact with us, with each other too, but it's one that humans use quite a lot when we're communicating with our dogs. Crystallized intelligence, that's their mental achievement. That's one of my favorite things about dogs. Dogs know when they've done something, when they've achieved something. We call it the eureka effect. So when you're teaching your dogs, one of my favorite things in the entire world is to see a dog the moment they get it, right? You're trying to show them something, and that moment they figure it out, you can see it in their face, and they're like, I did it. Oh my gosh, I'm so proud. And it makes them feel really, really good about themselves because they're aware that they figured something out. And it's really exciting to watch. It really is one of my favorite things about teaching dogs. Because they feel good, you feel good. It's a beautiful moment, like you won the Olympics. So that's a type of intelligence that they have. And they also have fluid intelligence. And you'll notice that people have all of these too. So, and dogs aren't the only species that have all of these, but they are really advanced in terms of this type of intelligence, these types of intelligence, more so than others. There are others just as smart, if not smarter, but I'm not going to say that out loud, as dogs. Animals like crows, elephants, also crazy intelligent. Fluid intelligence is potential. It's your teachability. It's how much you're able to absorb new information, make changes as a result of learning new information. And again, people are able to do the same thing. And it's one of the reasons that we're able to communicate with dogs so very well. You think about a seeing eye dog, for example, or a military dog that, is used to help people in disasters, help find people after earthquakes. the varied types of intelligence that they have to use, not only to learn what they're supposed to do, but then to go off into the field on their own. I mean, the seeing eye dog has their person with them, but they're the ones that are saying, okay, is it safe to cross the street? Should we turn this way or that way? Should I climb over here to look for a person? It's really amazing what they're capable of. So all of that stuff, the way that their brains work, and that is really the tippity tip of the iceberg, impacts how dogs learn. And some of the ways that dogs learn are by understanding our intentions, us as humans, understanding our intentions when we make gestures. So later, when I talk about luring as a training process, we lead a dog into a certain position, and then we give that position a name. And the dog understands that, okay, this is the position they want me in when they say this word, because they've pointed it out to me and then they've attached language to it. And that's pretty impressive for them to be able to figure out. So they can understand when humans point at things. And like I said, other animals can't do that. That is a uniquely evolved behavior for dogs because of how intertwined they are with humans. Dogs can add to their vocabulary. Remember the 160 to 250 words, they can add to their vocabulary, which makes it easier for them and us to communicate, because the more words they know, the more words we can use when we're speaking to them. Trial and error. Dogs are really good problem solvers. There's different levels of trial and error. Some doesn't take a lot of intelligence, and some does take a lot of reasoning. And dogs are able to do both. They can make inferences, meaning that they can take two different things and understand the relationship between the two, how one might influence the other. They can learn associatively, which means that they can take two separate things and draw conclusions about the relationship. Like you could take a kite and a toy and a ball, say a kite and a ball, and they could make the association that both of those items are toys. Kite might not be a great example, but you know what I mean. They learn through imitation. They copy the actions of humans and also of other dogs in the household or other dogs they know. My first dog, Jake, was such a quiet, sweet boy until my neighbor's little dog barked constantly. And then Jake learned to bark, and he liked to go out there. Every time she barked, he barked. On his own, no bark. So they learn from copying others, for better or for worse. And dogs also ask humans for help. If they can't, get their toy that rolled under the couch, they will come and ask you. Service dogs are trainers use that element of dog behavior to enhance service dogs' ability to get help for their person. Say you have a service dog and their person fell or had a seizure or something. They're taught then to go find a human and ask that human for help, bring them back to their person so that they can call 911 or whatever needs to be done. And that's pretty impressive. So back to reasoning, mentioned it just briefly with the trial and error, but a dog's ability to solve problems, especially when the answer is not obvious, where they have to picture in their mind a potential solution and reason it out, is impressive. And if your dog has poor social skills, remember we talked about the social intelligence and having social skills. If your dog has poor genetics, and by poor genetics, I mean generational trauma or an ill mother dog when they were pregnant because they weren't being cared for, that creates poor genetics. Or poor experiences, dogs that just lived outside and nobody taught them anything or took care of them or anything like that. It inhibits their ability to reason. because they're just not, they don't have the experience. They don't have the self-assurance almost. It goes back to being fearful of novelty. If you're under socialized and you're easily frightened and you're very anxious, you are not going to put yourself in a position where you're trying something new with no idea of what the outcome is going to be because it doesn't feel safe. Other things that can inhibit reasoning for humans and for dogs are being super frustrated, because you just can't think straight when you're super frustrated, being afraid, which I just talked about, old age, which there's not a lot we can do about that, pain and illness. Pain and illness is a huge impactor of dog behavior, of any kind of dog behavior. Trainers, any good trainer, if you come to a trainer and say, my dog, all of a sudden my dog is doing XYZ, and they never used to do it. First thing the trainer will say is, when was the last time your dog went to the vet? You have to eliminate a medical cause for sudden behavior changes before you can look at a training solution, because that's how big of a deal it has on their behavior. So in order to be able to reason, just to kind of highlight how big of a deal it is that our dogs can do this, is you have to have an understanding of the problem. You have to be able to plan and strategize a solution, right? There are people who aren't very good at this. You have to have independent learning. So you have to have sort of gut instincts. You have to be able to trust yourself and be sort of have natural problem solving skills, which could be strict instinct, but also just kind of, you know, we have a type and they have a type of intelligence where you kind of know, but you don't really know, and you're not sure why you think you know. Some of that is your gut instinct. That's not a very scientific explanation, but it's a thing. Dependent learning, and that is cooperative problem solving, something that, you know, partnerships, cooperation, asking humans for help, being able to do that. And again, they're not the only animal in the world that can do some of these things, but they can do all of these things very well, and it's very impressive. Okay, so all of that is used by dogs. There are types of intelligent reasoning, how their brain works when it comes to communicating with each other and with us. So, pardon me, I just need to take a sip of my tea. Communication is fascinating. And there is a concept in communication theory. I used to teach communication for about 15 years. I was a teacher before I was a dog trainer, a people teacher. So I taught communication classes at a couple of different universities. And one of the underlying principles of communication is that you're only able to communicate what the person or dog you're talking to understands that you've communicated, right? So that if there's a misunderstanding, it's not the fault of the listener, it's the fault of the speaker. So if I give you directions to how to do something and you mishear me and you do it wrong, I still didn't communicate correct information to you because you didn't understand what I said. I communicated misinformation to you because you heard misinformation. And the reason that's important is because normally in a human conversation, you can say, did you say X, Y? You know, you can clarify, you have more back and forth. But when we're teaching our dogs and we think we've explained something to them really clearly, but they didn't understand, that's not their fault. And it's really easy for us as humans to think my dog's being stubborn, or my dog just doesn't want to do it, or my dog's naughty. And I guarantee you, the truth is that your dog didn't understand. They're just not clear on what you're asking them to do, or they would be more than happy to do it for you. So we have to be mindful of how we're communicating and making sure that we're communicating to our dogs, one, in a way that they understand. And that could be either because of the words we use or because of the pace. If we're moving too fast, they might not understand. If we're using different words to say, like, you have marker words in training, and some people use a clicker. Clickers are nice because they have the same noise every single time, but clickers are a pain because it's just one more thing to deal with. So when your dog does the thing you've asked them to correctly, some people will say yes or good, or they'll just make a noise, or they'll use their clicker. If sometimes you say yes and sometimes you use a clicker, that's going to be confusing to your dog. You want to always do the same thing. You want to clearly communicate consistently what it is you're trying to say to them, and they're going to learn faster and they're going to remember longer, and you're going to have more fun training them. So that's sort of why this stuff is important, or why I think it's important. So one of the things that dogs can do, and this applies to training as well, is that they're really, really good intention readers. So intention reading is something that humans do, right? It's foundational to every form of human group, human culture, human religions, human whatever it is we have. Our ability to understand, to have social norms, to imitate, as we're growing up and learning as humans to fit in and those kind of things. We use intention reading, and dogs do it too. And that's one of the ways that we bond so deeply with dogs, is their ability to understand our gestures, our tones of voice, our facial expressions, how they can understand what we're feeling in any given moment. And dogs, when we're teaching, and let me think of a good example. So when we're teaching our dogs, they are reading us, right? They're reading our body language. And oftentimes we're saying one thing with our mouths and we're saying something else with our body language. Kind of like having a tell if you're a poker player. So if you're teaching your dog to come when called, let's say, and you're wondering why every time you're about to call them, they start to come towards you. They break it. And you're like, oh, they didn't do it. They didn't wait. Almost always what's happening is that you're somehow telegraphing physically that you're about to open your mouth and say, come. And so that's what they're responding to, because they're much more visual in terms of how they communicate with each other. So it could be that you're leaning down a little bit because you're pulling your treat down to give to them, and you're about to call them. And so when they see you start to lean down, they say, oh, they're going to call me, I'm going to go running. So when those kind of things happen in your training with your dog, you have two choices. You can either stop telegraphing and be more mindful of what your body is physically doing, or you can not care and you can be like, well, I was about to say it anyway, so it's fine. He knows I was about to say it and he started to come running. Either way is fine. The only time it's not fine is if you're training your dog, you want your dog to be trained to some sort of obedience competition level, in which case you have to be very, very strict. But for your average family dog, it doesn't matter. And it's totally up to you what you want them to do. So oftentimes when it seems like our dog is not waiting long enough or not doing what we ask in the way we think they should, it's because we're asking them too soon without realizing we're asking them too soon. So that's something for us as humans when we're training our dogs to think about. So the other thing that dogs do, and people do, we're very much alike, is evaluating cooperative partners, which is really just a fancy way of saying form relationships, right? Make friends. Dogs are able to observe people, other dogs, whatever, and make decisions about how good of a companion or a friend that creature is going to be based on how they see them act, right? Do they share their toys? Are they gentle? Are they, do they smile a lot, or are they cranky, right? We want to spend time with people and dogs who are enjoyable to spend time with, and dogs are the same. And that's why in the home, oftentimes the dog will have a favorite. And very often when you think about the favorite person, it's the person that gives the dinner. It's the person that does most of the walks. It's the person that provides the dog with the most good things. So it kind of makes sense for the dog to be favorite. So if that's happening and you feel like, someone's having emotions about it because they want the dog to also love them equally, you shift where the good stuff is coming from. You have a more equal division of who feeds the dog, who walks the dog, who plays with the dog, who trains the dog, because training is a great way to deepen your relationship with your dog because it's fun and it involves food and games, essentially. And, we do this too, right? Who do we want to be a partner with for a group project in school, right? That's always a very important decision because you're either going to do it all or, I don't know, you either want to be with the smart kid or the hard worker. Dogs are the same. You want to be able to get something out of your relationships, and not necessarily material things. You want to get comfort, a listening ear. But dogs are able to do that. And we want to think about, what is it that we're giving them? How are they evaluating us as a cooperative partner when they're looking at how we treat them? Okay. This is my dog barking. Just because it's a great example of barking. She likes to bark out the window. Dogs communicate vocally, and they communicate with their body, right? Facial expressions, body language, and their tail, very specific tail movements. So I'll briefly go over vocal. Last month's topic was about indoor barking. And if you didn't see that, I can include a link to that class when I send out the recording of this class as well. And dogs vocally communicate by crying or whining, which they do when they're upset, legitimately upset, or when they want something, or when they're bored or frustrated. Shadow here, she has certain toys that are her babies and she hides them like babies. She was someone's breeding dog down south. And so when she has a baby and she hasn't found a good spot to hide it yet, she'll walk around the house crying until she finds a good spot, which almost always is the couch. So that's a dog crying. I didn't want to make her cry to take a video of it. So you got barking. She likes to do that. They bark. They bark for a lot of different reasons. To get attention, to alert you to potential danger, as a warning, for fun, because they're bored. There's a lot of different reasons that they will bark. And I'll put a link to the other class. If barking's an issue for your dog, you can learn about it. I'm also, while I'm talking about barking, I am putting together a really cool class on barking that really goes in depth. These classes, they give you actionable stuff. They're not in depth, right? Not guaranteed to solve all your problems. But I'm creating a course on barking that's a paid course that's going to come out sometime later in the summer. And it is going to be about barking, and it's going to have the actual solutions to how to get your dog to stop barking, no matter the reason that they're barking. It'll cover the main reasons and how to stop each one. And I'm sure Miss Shadow will feature in it as examples of a lot of the barking. Dogs growl. Growling is a much maligned vocal communication that dogs use, but it's very, very important. A growl is the dog equivalent of like a raised voice, like, leave me alone, you're bothering me, right? Get out. It's that. And people don't like it. People take offense at it. And we shouldn't, because it's very good information. A dog, when their dog is growling, is saying, you're upsetting me and I don't want to escalate to a bite, but I will if I have to. You need to back off now. So it's a warning. And you should always respect it. If your dog growls because you're trying to take their toy, drop the toy and walk away 100% of the time. Now, that doesn't mean that you let your dog rule everything because they growl whenever they want something. In the moment when your dog feels like their back's against the wall, you give them their way. And then when everyone has calmed down, you address the growling. And whether they growled because they were guarding a resource, then you address the resource guarding and you train them not to do that. You change their mind about how they feel about guarding the resources. But you always want to respect the growl, and not to constantly talk about Shadow, but Shadow does not growl. Wherever she was, so she was 2 when I got her, and wherever she was before, I'm sure she growled, and it was either ignored or it was punished. Because she does not growl now, but she bites. So she gives no warning. But if you frighten her, she will just bite you. And that's the consequence of punishing a growl and ignoring a growl, is that you get a much more unpredictable animal who feels like my only recourse is to bite when I feel threatened. And they can feel threatened by, the mailman walking by. They don't necessarily have rational feelings about the threats. So we always want our dog to feel comfortable to growl when they feel the need to growl. It's very important. And then I put howling in here because there are some breeds that howl, hound dogs, individual dogs will howl. I don't have a lot of experience with howling. Jake howled once in his life. He was my last dog. Shadow doesn't do it. Again, it's communication. Mostly they will howl if they hear another dog howl. Often dogs will howl if they're hunting or if they hear like a fire truck, something like that. There is some mysterious element to it, but it's very cool to hear when you hear it. So I added it to my list. So dog body language, again, there's a lot going on with your dog. They communicate first and foremost or largely with body language. And it can be very subtle. And oftentimes your dog, so when you hear stories about a dog and someone says, well, my dog, bit my nephew just out of the blue, the clear blue sky. I promise you that it was not the clear blue sky. The dog gave signs that were ignored. Now, they were probably not ignored out of rudeness, because nobody wants to get bit by a dog, but they were ignored because they were actually missed, because some of them are very subtle, or they were seen but not understood. So some of the signs that a dog is uncomfortable are what we call whale eyes, where you see the whites of a dog's eyes, which is not normal like it is on us. That is a sign of a dog that is anxious. They turn their head away. Lip licking. So if you look at this friendly and polite guy, I don't know if you can see my little blue thing. The friendly and polite guy up here, he's got his little tongue out and it says like kiss. That can be friendly. You see his whole body, he's wiggly, right? He's loose. But a tongue out, if you go down to this stressed guy with the nose lick, a tongue out can also be a sign of stress. So when you're looking at dog body language, you never want to look at any one thing in a vacuum. You have to look at the whole dog and the context, right? Because in some instances, a yawn, I know there's a yawn on here, yawn. A yawn can be a sign of stress. It could also be just a tired dog who's yawning. It can also be contagious, just like with people. If someone yawns next to you and you yawn, that happens with your dog too. So those are 3 completely different reasons for yawning, one of which is a problem, the other 2 not so much. Being this, I'm your love bug on the belly, give me a belly rub. Sometimes your dog is asking for a belly rub. Sometimes dogs show you their belly and it's considered submissive appeasement gesture, and they're kind of saying, please don't hurt me. So you want to look at the situation. Their facial expression are very similar to ours, right? So if they're mad, they're going to have like a sterner, tighter face with a wrinkly eyebrows. If they're happy, they're going to be looser. Their mouth's probably going to be open. So if you think about, what a human looks like when they're having facial expressions, you can sort of count on your dog having similar ones. And then you look at their body. Is their body tight? Is their body loose? If your dog is willing to have their back to you, that's often a sign of trust. Sometimes it's a sign of hiding. So it can be complicated, but there are a lot of resources. These drawings here are drawn by Lily Chin, who does a lot of drawings like this. She makes a lot of free posters you can find online. She came out with a book, I think a couple of years ago now, that I'll show you when we get to the Q&A. But it's called Doggy Language. Great for everyone, but particularly great if there's kids in the house because they're cute, adorable drawings. Some things that interfere with modern dog communication is breeding. So we as humans tend to breed dogs for looks a lot of the time. So if your dog doesn't have a tail, it's going to limit their ability to communicate because they don't have a tail to wag, and that provides a lot of information. If your dog, say you have a pit bull that you adopted from somewhere and the previous owner cut their ears off like they do to them sometimes, now they don't have ears to express themselves with. You can still look at their head and see their muscles move, but it's gonna impair them. You know, a dog with very long fur, you're not necessarily going to always see what their body is doing. And your individual dog, because they're so used to being with you and how you behave, might have developed their own unique style of communicating with you as well. So the best thing to do is to get a general idea of dog body language and then observe your dog, right? You'll know when your dog's happy. What does your dog do right before dinner? Okay, that's probably going to be a happy dog. How does he act when you come home from work? Probably going to be a happy dog. You know, what does he do if there's a thunderstorm? Probably going to be a scared dog, unless they don't care. And then you can, you know, it's most important for you to understand your dog. So watch what they do. An easy thing to remember is the 4 Fs, which are fight, flight, freeze, and fidget. So these are dog responses to fear. Fight, which is the barking and lunging that a lot of reactive dogs do, that you see dogs do on leash a lot of the time. Technically, that's considered distance increasing behavior. They're trying to look frightening so that you will run away. They don't really want to fight you, but a leash dog cannot flee. Off leash, most dogs will flee. The other thing that they will sometimes do, and people do this too, is freeze, like deer in the headlights. They'll just freeze, like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Or they'll fidget. And fidget are things like the lip licking, scratching. Sometimes a dog will sit and kind of scratch itself because it's nervous. Shaking, like shaking off as if they were wet, is another thing that they'll do. That's a way to release some of their tension. But watching your own dog, I think, is my best advice for learning the most about dog body language. And I'll include resources when I send you the video. So the tail is awesome. And dog tails, most of the time, because we learn it when we're children, and we all say, well, a wagging tail is a friendly dog. But that's not always true. You'll notice this is from doghealth.com, this graphic, and they do health articles that are written by veterinarians, so very useful if you want to check them out. So dogs typically, and again, you can't just look at the tail. You have to look at the whole dog, and you have to look at the context in which the behavior is happening. But in general, we all can picture sort of the tail between the legs, a down tail. That's a nervous dog, right? Or a submissive dog, or a frightened dog. A high tail is alert and excited. If the dog is also leaning forward on its front half of its body, that can be leaning towards aggressive. They also have a left and right bias for their tail. So if your dog is wagging its tail to the left, and I know this is very hard to kind of catch in a short moment, because you're like, is it my left or is it their left? So you don't necessarily have to memorize it as much as just be aware that a wagging tail means a lot of different things depending on a lot of different things. But a left wagging tail is a more concerned dog. A right wagging tail is a more happy dog. And again, I get that I can't tell sometimes. I'm like, is that left or right? Or should I get behind him and look? So it's the point, at least for this class, is be mindful of making snap judgments. Look at the whole dog and the whole scene before deciding if a dog is happy, sad, angry, whatever it is. And most of the time, we're going to be talking about your dog, right? I mean, maybe if you see an off-leash dog, you're going to want to make these determinations. But most of the time, this is going to be so that you can read your own dog and understand your own dog better. So all of that previous stuff to say that understanding the majority of that or some of that is going to help you teach your dog, right? You can teach your dog anything. Dogs can learn to go and, get you a beverage out of the refrigerator. Dogs can learn to sniff a packaged muffin and let you know if there's gluten in it very consistently. So they're amazing. It's fun to teach them. If you have an under-socialized dog or a more fearful dog, the more things you teach them, even if you teach them tricks like give paw or something, the more it grows their confidence. And so the less anxious they will be. So there's so many different benefits to teaching your dog. One, there's certain things they have to know just to maneuver their way through the world, right? Like don't poop in the living room and things like that. But teaching them a variety of different things is good for their well-being as well, and fun. So, like I said in the beginning, positive trainers, sometimes called fear-free, sometimes called force-free, reward-based, click and treat. There's a lot of different things that we get called, but our focus is on cooperating with the dog. We ask a dog to do things and we make it worth the dog's while, which is kind of how we communicate with other humans, right? We typically don't boss other humans. We ask them to do things. And we reward people. So I always tell my clients that it's helpful to think of the treats or the rewards as your dog's money. And, none of us work for free, really. We all want to get our paycheck. No matter how much we love our work, we still have to pay our rent and things like that. So you want to make the reward commensurate with the request. And the rewards don't have to be food. Most dogs will work for food. But if your dog doesn't, or you don't want to overfeed your dog, dogs will work for praise. They'll work for ear scratches, toys and games. You'll see, if you ever see like a police dog taking a break, they are typically rewarded with a toy. And, playtime with their handler. If you think about how your dog learns and how your dog communicates with you, it's going to make it easier for you to teach them. And then it's going to be easier for them to live successfully with you, because we live in a very complicated modern society that's unnatural for dogs. And I think in a lot of ways, unnatural for us as well. But there's not a lot I can do about that. So a couple of things that are going to help you. So I have a couple of sort of foundational things about positive training and then some tips for you. We have the 3 Ds of training, and those are distance, duration, and distraction. You never want to start with all 3, right? When you start, think about starting at a kindergarten level and then 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. For example, when we teach a dog recall, when we teach a dog to come when called, we don't go out to the field where all the other dogs are playing and call them from 100 yards away. That's too much distraction and it's too much distance. We have to make it easier, because otherwise they're not going to understand. They're not going to come. So we usually start in the house where there's the least amount of distractions, because it's where the dog spends the most amount of his time. And from maybe 2 feet away, call the dog. And then you make the distance longer. And then you make the distractions higher. Maybe you go to your own backyard and you wait until you really think your dog is at a level where they can actually be successful out in the real world. So you always start teaching your dog something in a way that it's a game almost. And then down the road, you transition it to being useful to you in the real world. Duration comes into play when you're teaching your dog, let's say, place. Maybe you want them to stay in their place while you make your dinner so that they're not underfoot begging. When you teach place, you're not going to start out having them stay there for 30 minutes. They can't do that. You're going to start out having them get on their place and stay there for 3 seconds. And then you can work up the time over, right? You don't the very first time say, okay, you sit here while I cook a steak, because they're not going to be able to do it and they're going to fail. We want to make it easy for them, set them up for success, and then up the ante, up the ante. And you can up it multiple levels over the course of one day. You don't have to spend a week on one area. It depends on how quickly your dog learns, how complicated the particular behavior is. But you always want to be thinking about those 3 Ds. And then there are 3 ways to train. There's probably more, 3 main ways to train. There's luring, capturing, and shaping. Most of the time, you're going to be using luring, right? So luring is when I take a treat in my hand, I want to teach a dog to sit. So I'm going to raise the treat up over their head, maybe a little behind their head. So they're going to be looking up and kind of leaning back, and their bum's going to automatically go down on the ground. Now they've sat. I give them their treat. I've lured them into that position. I haven't touched them. I've just lured them. You can do the same thing to teach them to lie down. After a few times, your dog will figure out that when my bum hits the ground, I get this treat. So they'll start just going straight there. They won't need to be lured anymore. And then you can call it something. Then you call it sit. And then when you say sit, your dog will sit and get their treat. And so that's luring. It's sort of like maneuvering them, but you're not physically touching them. Capturing is, I also call it stealth training, because that's when you see your dog doing something that you really are happy about and you would like to promote. Say they're chilling out in their bed, just not making any trouble, and you want to promote it. You reward them for what they're doing, even though you didn't ask them to do it, and you attach a word to it so that later you can ask them to do it. So good, relax, give them their treat. You can capture random stuff. You can also observe your dog over time to look for things that you can capture. Shaping is my least favorite and my least used. Some people love it, but it's more complicated, which is why I don't usually share it with people that are just want to teach their dogs some basics. But that is when you don't lure. You sort of wait, you have in mind what you want the dog to do. And you kind of, let's say you want them to go lay down on their bed. So you don't say anything. You put the bed and you kind of wait for them to go near the bed. And when they go near the bed, they get a treat. So then they're like, oh, when I go near this bed, I get a treat. And then they put a foot on the bed, they get 2 treats. They're like, ooh, that's even better. Put a foot on the bed. And eventually, over time, they'll figure out that if I go and lay on this bed, I get a jackpot of treats. That's shaping. It's nice because it gives your dog an opportunity to really think and reason things out. And it can be a fun game if you have the time. So go ahead and use it. I don't usually use it because people are usually wanting their dogs to kind of learn the things they want them to learn in a reasonable amount of time. But it is cool and it is fun. So it's certainly worth a try. Luring, I would say, is what most people do. So then I have for you 6 tips that are going to make a big difference. One thing that I always say constantly to everyone is that patience is 50% of dog training. You want to be patient with your dog. You want to be patient with yourself. And patience means, give both of you some grace. Some things are going to be easier to teach and to learn than other things. But it also means give your dog time to think. So if you tell your dog to come, right? Say you're in your backyard and you say, come, Fido, come. And they stand there for a few seconds. Don't be so quick to say, come on, Fido, come, come. Because they might be thinking, right? You want to give them a chance to think. You want to put yourself in their brain and they're like, oh, come, wait, I know this one. Hold on, hold on. I know what it is. Give them that time to reason it out, to think about it, and then to come running. Because they're going to be more proud of themselves. You're going to be more proud of them. And it's just going to be a much more fulfilling experience. Now, if 10 seconds go by and they haven't come, call them again, right? Maybe they don't know, but give them that few seconds. Other reason why you want to put a little bit of time between saying it is that to a dog, because they don't actually speak our language, to a dog, come is very different from come, come, come. Two different completely things. Oh, thank you, sweetheart. My dog just ran over. Good girl. They're two very different things. So that's patience. Number two, consistency is king. Now, that doesn't mean you have to train all day, every day. It means you want to have consistency in the language you use. So let's say you want your dog to get off the couch when you ask. If sometimes you say off and sometimes you say down, it's going to be hard for your dog to understand because those are two different words. If there's, a couple of different people in the house and everyone uses a different language cue, it's going to be harder for the dog. So you want to be consistent with the language that you use and with the rules that you have. So that doesn't mean you have to decide 100% like the dog can never be on the furniture or the dog can always be on the furniture. But you can have a rule like the dog can only be on the furniture when invited to be on the furniture. So that means the dog stays off the furniture unless you say, come on, come up, right? Yes, I know, good girl. She tried. Unless you invite them on, right? Now, you have to be consistent with that because if you catch them on the couch and you hadn't invited them and you let it go, then the dog is going to see that the words don't have meaning, that the rules don't really apply. And it's just going to set them back in the training and it's going to probably frustrate you. So that's why you want to be consistent. You can fit the training in, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. You can do 5 minutes every other day. It's your training, it's your schedule. You fit it in when you can, when it's convenient for you, when it feels good for you. And, obviously the more you do it, the quicker the learning, but, a fast result's not necessarily a best result. So you get to decide that. Number 3 is at the first sign of frustration, take a break. Take a break or change tactics. So whether you're getting frustrated or your dog is getting frustrated, take a minute, right? Go to opposite corners, just take a little break, everybody get a drink of water, or work on something else. That's change tactics. So if your dog is struggling to learn, drop it. Go back to sit for a few minutes or go back to recall for a few minutes instead of getting stuck in that loop of he's not getting it and the dog being like, I don't know what to do. That's going to reset you for the future. And it's going to maintain the feeling around training of being a positive thing for both of you. Number 4 is always end on a high note. I saw online the other day that a trainer said this was a stupid advice, but I don't agree. I think it's great advice. Because why would you want to end on a sour note? And what end on a high note means is that no matter how the training session goes, end it off with an easy win, right? So say your dog struggled or say your dog didn't struggle, they aced everything. At the end, have them sit, have them do paw, have them do something they like to do, give them their treat, and then you're done for the day. Because that's going to increase the likelihood that they're going to anticipate, in a good way, more training. They're going to look forward to more training, and so are you. And then you want to use the right reward, right? If we go back to thinking about the reward as money, you don't want to ask your dog to do a $50 job and offer them $1 for it. So the dog is the one who decides what a task is worth. And you want to offer them something that they feel is worthwhile. Now, it's easy to tell because if you ask your dog to do something and they don't do it for a piece of kibble, then the kibble's not a high enough reward. maybe if you're calling your dog in the field, you're calling them to come to you and they have to walk away from the other dogs, maybe that's going to earn them some cheese and not a kibble. You can use some trial and error to figure out what works. One of the tricks that I use is so that you're not giving your dog like ridiculous amounts of cheese if you're spending a lot of time working on something, is you mix high value and lower value treats together in the same treat bag so that everything rubs together. Everything kind of smells like cheese or chicken or whatever the high value thing is. And sometimes your dog gets the high value and sometimes they get a piece of kibble that smells like cheese. Dogs tend to be optimists. And your dog is thinking, maybe the next one's going to be cheese. Oh, it's kibble again. Maybe the next one's going to be cheese. They'll still be happy to work because every once in a while they get cheese. They're optimists. And that way you can not overdo it, not be giving them constant rich foods. You can also make their meals smaller. If you spend a day where you're doing a lot of training, just make their meals smaller so that you're not sort of overfeeding them or something like that. And the better a dog gets at it, there's going to be a point where he's going to sit for kibble. And then ultimately, you're going to phase out the treats. They're not going to get a treat every time you ask them to do something. You're always going to give your dog some level of treats their whole life, but you're not going to constantly have treats on you everywhere you go. That sort of gets phased out. And then number 6 is just fit the training in wherever you can. You can put 5 minutes of training while you're cooking the dogs, or maybe don't cook it, while you're making the dog's dinner, right? Maybe if they've learned place, they practice place while you're making dinner. You can practice things like sit or touch or attention while you're walking your dog. Practice loose leash walking while you're walking. You got to walk your dog anyway. Practice a bunch of stuff in that amount of time while you're walking your dog. Or 5 minutes in the morning or something like that. You really don't need a lot of time. And if you fit it into the routine, it fits in really easily. So those are the tips. So that was a lot. I know. I probably could have done 3 different ones, but I wanted to include things that were actionable along with things that were interesting about a dog's brain. So we talked about how dogs think, how they learn, how they communicate, how that all blends in with how we teach our dogs. And hopefully there was enough actionable stuff that you can use when you're working with your dog at home. So next steps wise, I'm going to send you out the video tomorrow or Saturday, depending on when I get it back from Zoom. Send you the video. I'm going to send you some additional resources. I'll include the barking video. I'll include the some body language resources, and I'm going to include the Lily Chin book as well, which I'm going to show you in a second. And really, in a perfect world, what I anticipate you doing is taking whatever couple of nuggets that you learned in the past hour and adapt them to your daily life with your dog and improve either your training routine or your dog's enrichment or how you communicate with your dog. Use that information in some kind of way to make things better for you and your dog. And then I always include, when I send out the videos, a link if you want to talk to me more about your dog situation, something you're struggling to teach them, some behavioral problem they might have, whatever it is, there's always going to be a link to reach out to me and make an appointment to chat with me. And then we'll start the Q&A. I always put pictures of clients, although honestly, there's 2 pictures of Shadow, 1 picture of Jake, and the little puppy I'm holding was one of my early clients, who was a feisty little fella. So let me go back to us. I will stop sharing my screen. Whoops. Oh my goodness. Okay, okay, you're unmuted. Awesome. So I wanted to show you this book. This is the Lily Chin book. It's called Doggy Language, A Dog Lover's Guide to Understanding Your Best Friend. And I'll write it down in the email. And then there's also this one is really nice. This is called The Secret Language of Dogs by Victoria Stilwell. And I'll write that one down too. It's like, this one's a nice, easy read. They both are. They both are. Okay, so questions?
Yeah, I have a question. One of our two dogs, I mean, I've always taught sit and been fairly successful with it, but the dog that we have, who we've had for about 1.5 years now, when I try teaching sit in the usual way, like you described,
Yep.
she goes back on her legs. She goes
She
up.
stands up.
Yeah.
Yep. A lot of small dogs do that. And if she doesn't already know sit, a lot of dogs that have just never been trained do that. So I had a new client Wednesday, and she did that. You have a couple of options. One, just keep trying. She'll get it. Eventually, she'll accidentally like put her bum down and you give her the treat real quick, right?
Okay.
So you just can keep at it. You can try to maneuver. So when you put the thing back and she stands up, try to pull it down a little bit to see if she'll scooch back down and get on her bum, right? That's one thing. The other thing you can do is keep your eye on her, and when you find her naturally sitting, put it, give her a treat.
Okay.
Always have a couple in your pocket. So then you can kind of capture it. But
Okay.
she will eventually get it. A lot of them do that, especially the small ones. They're just like, I'll meet you halfway and I'll stand up like a little circus dog.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you can keep trying. She will get it. You try pulling, once she's up, try pulling it down, just a little bit, keeping it still near her head, but down. So she might squat down a bit. And
Kind of dance around when you do that.
right. You can also, to sort of motivate her, if she sort of half gets it, like let's say she's up and you get her to kind of sit on her haunches, but her front is still up, give her the treat, right?
Okay. All
Or
right.
have the treat for that. It's like C work. She kind of sort of did it.
Yeah.
And then once she gets good at that, then you can up level it and then not give her the treat just for doing that, but then now wait for her to put a paw down, puts one paw down, right? Now she got her bum and one paw down. Okay, she can have a treat for that.
Okay.
And once she gets good at that, wait for her to put the both paws down, like stop giving the treats for the sort of kind of did it and
Okay.
hold them out for this. So that's another option.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very common. She'll still get it. The other thing you can do if she doesn't really know anything, teach her something else first. So she kind of gets the idea of what teaching is all about.
All right. Yeah.
Right? Teach
Yeah.
her touch. Touch is a nice, easy one where you put your hand and they touch their nose to your hand when
Yeah.
they get their treat. That's a nice, easy one. Lie down, depends on the dog. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not. And that's alluring. The dog is there. Take the treat, put it like kind of down in front of their chest and down. So they sort of have to scooch down and eventually they'll lie down to get it. You can try that. But if you try teaching her something else first, and she'll kind of be like, oh, she's trying to teach me something with this sit thing. Might make it easier for her, but she'll
Well,
get it eventually.
yeah, the other dog we have, I mean, who learns sit so quickly, he's not learning touch very easily. He
Yeah,
kind of
it's
looks at me
funny.
like, why do I have to touch your hand?
It's funny. Some dogs learn like really complicated stuff so fast, and then really basic stuff they can't figure out. My
Yeah.
dog struggles with everything, honestly. She knows paw, and every time I ask her to touch, she just gives me a paw. She's like, I don't know what you want. Here's a paw.
Yeah.
Um, One thing that helps touch is if you rub the treat on your hand
Oh, so it
first,
smells like the, yeah.
your hand smells like. The other thing you can do is sort of hold the treat between your two fingers, like stick it in there and say touch,
Yeah. Yeah.
because then they're going to be like, oh, can I lick that treat?
Okay.
So that
All
can
right.
help.
That's good. Yeah.
There's always a trick to get them to do it.
Yes. Yes. Uh,
Anything else?
um, I can't think of anything. Can you?
No?
No, I think we're good. We'll practice We'll keep
Yeah.
practicing. We're
All
still
right,
practicing.
awesome. I
We're
know we
still,
had some people that couldn't stay for the whole time, so maybe I'll offer questions in the email too. But yeah, practice. I'll send out if you have questions, just reach out.
okay. We're still practicing. We're still working on the reactivity on the leash. That's a hard one.
It's tough. Reactivity, it is tough. Some dogs can get to the point where they're totally fine, and other dogs can get 50% better. I mean, all dogs can improve to an extent.
Yeah.
And the focus is on making them feel safe, making them feel confident, training them helps them feel confident. Maybe focus on if they're still reacting when they see things, focus on getting their attention on walks so that you can deter them from the triggers.
Well, it works.
Timing is a big factor because you need to see the trigger, show them the trigger, give them the treat before they bark. So timing can be a factor.
Yeah, I mean, they do pretty well. Like we'll see the dog coming, and so we
Yeah.
start treating.
Mhm.
But the second the other dog is just about to go past us, then they're like, it's
Yeah.
like they did okay until the dog got,
So that's a distance issue. Like, is the dog on the opposite side of the street or
yeah,
like how
yeah,
close? So
opposite side, yeah.
do you stop and give the treats while the dog is walking by? Or do you
Yes.
keep going?
No,
Okay.
yeah.
Try to keep going. Because if your dog is physically moving, he's processing some of his energetic angst, right?
Yeah.
Um, so instead of standing, it's hard for him to stand there when the other dog is moving. So
Okay.
if you keep him moving, now if it's hard, if he's small and you're like scooched down to give him his things, toss the treats on the ground in front of him to kind of keep him directed in that way, like give him a couple and then keep going.
Okay.
So that's one option. Another thing you can try if he'll do it is as the dogs get into the point where you think he's going to start barking because the dog is going to walk by, stop looking at the dog. Get him to turn around back to the dog, like go around to his other side, get his attention, ask him to sit or lie down or whatever, so that he's occupied and forgets about the dog.
Okay.
So that's another thing you can try. And, it's always helpful to try one or two things and then there's one is going to work better for you and him. Do you know what I mean? And so you
Right.
can see what works
All right. Those are good hints. We'll give those a
better.
whirl.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Thank
And you
you.
can let me know how it goes. I got
Okay.
plenty of hints.
All right.
All
Appreciate
right.
it. Thank you, Ruth.
Yes, thank you,
Yeah,
Ruth.
my
Really enjoyed
pleasure.
it.
Have a great night, you guys.
You too.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye. You were such a good girl the whole time.